Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name's Melanie McNair. I'm the Senior Director of Public Programming here at the Center for Fiction. I think you all seem sort of familiar, but how many of you have not been here before? Okay, so a few of you. So we are the only literary nonprofit that focuses on the creation of fiction. And if you are joining us, if you live in New York City, these membership brochures on your table. Membership means that you get access to the second floor where we have a beautiful reading room and a terrace, and you also get to check out books from our library and many other perks. We have an open house this Saturday if you'd like to check it out. Welcome to those of you who are joining us via live stream as well tonight. After the talk, we will have an audience Q&A, and if you're here, if you would just raise your hand, and one of our fabulous interns will bring a microphone to you so that the people on YouTube can hear you too. And if you're on YouTube, please use the chat to add your question there, or you can email events@centerforfiction.org if the chat is giving you a hard time or for any reason. James and Valina were kind enough to pre-sign their books, but we will do a personalization line after the event this evening. I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome one of our neighbors, James Hannaham, here to celebrate his new book, Didn't Nobody Give a Shit What Happened to Carlotta? He is also the author of the novels God Say No, a Stonewall Book Award finalist, and Delicious Foods, which won the PEN Faulkner Award, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and was a Los Angeles Times Book Prize and Dayton Literary Prize finalist, as well as a New York Times notable book. Joining him are two guests from our partner organization for this evening, the Innocence Project, which works to restore freedom for the innocent, transform the system responsible for their unjust incarceration, and advance the innocence movement. And the two guests from there are Valina Beatty. She's a formal federal prosecutor and innocence litigator who represented Lee Stubbs in post-conviction. She has successfully exonerated wrongfully convicted clients, obtained presidential grants of clemency for drug offenders, served as an elected board member of the National Innocence Network, and was appointed commissioner on the West Virginia Governor's Indigent Defense Commission. She's currently a professor of law at Arizona State University, Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law, and the deputy director of the Academy for Justice, a criminal justice center at the law school that connects research with policy reform. We are also featuring her book, Manifesting Justice, Wrongly Convicted Women Reclaim Their Rights. And to moderate the conversation is Susie Salame. Sorry, Susie, the Director of Social Work at the Innocence Project. Susie works with the Social Work Department to support the recently freed and exonerated clients returning home after wrongful conviction and imprisonment. Please welcome them all to the stage.
Hello. How's everyone?
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome. Good to see you. We have a whole bunch of questions tonight. I'm going to read some off, but we'll have some questions and answers at the end for you as well. So, James.
Yes.
Carlotta is a hero who has embarked on an incredible journey into an unknown world of gentrified Fort Greene. Can you talk to us about why Carlotta is the character you developed for the story, and why this particular journey is one that throws your hero into the grips of the criminal legal system? And why was it important to tell?
Of course. And at a certain point, I just want to reassure people that I will read a little bit from the book so that
Yeah.
we understand the context of who Carlotta is.
Yes.
And all that. I want to say, like, my initial impulse to write the book was really just, I have a long history with this neighborhood. Mm-hmm. My father grew up here. I have a couple of cousins who still live in a brownstone that my grandfather bought in like 1951 or like really far back for like $11,000. So I've been coming here my entire life, which has just gotten longer, as lives sometimes do.
Hopefully.
And I've noticed that the change that was already happening sped up so much just in the last 10 years that I was just like, wow, I remembered it being a dangerous black neighborhood. I mean, I didn't think of it as dangerous. It was just where my grandma lived. But, everything I knew about it that people would say to me was like, oh man, you don't go to Fort Greene. That I found out earlier. And my initial impulse was just, I wanted to write about how the neighborhood has changed over the course of 50 years. But I kind of needed a character who had missed it all. And I was also in the back of my mind thinking that at some point it would be a good sort of, black novelist rite of passage to, deal with the carceral system and all the horrible things that it's done to us and other people. And that sort of those two ideas kind of attached to one another. And then I had another idea that was, as I started to do research, I was like, well, who are we sort of forgetting about? Who has like the worst time in prison? Because, I was projecting a little bit myself into these situations as I tend to do. And I was like, wow, as a gay man, I'd have it really bad. But then I was like, oh, as a trans person, I would really have a really bad time. Which, I sort of made that assumption, but then I went and started to do research and I was like, oh, this is much worse than I thought. Just the level of like misunderstanding and brutality and, we can get into more of the specifics of that later, but it just felt like, wow. And it also felt like, territory that nobody was really dealing with or maybe didn't really want to. And like my last book was about human trafficking of modern slavery among black folks in the South in the 20th century. So, that was another instance where I was like, oh, nobody's gonna really want to deal with this. I'm gonna have this material to myself for a little while. So similarly, it was like and this voice came to me and said, bitch, I'm gonna be the star of your book. And I said, oh, might be a little, people might get touchy about that. But I was like, and she was like, no, I'm going to be the star of your book. I was like, all right, okay, Carlotta. I'm cool with that.
So why don't you tell them a little bit about Carlotta?
Carlotta, and I wanted to kind of avoid labels when I wrote the book, because that's sort of what Carlotta is trying to do in several different ways through the book. She's gender non-conforming and living as a woman in the sort of technical jargon of trans culture. And it's a little disappointing to me that the word, people have been focusing a lot on the fact that she's trans, when the more important thing to me is that she's from New York. And that is one of the things that I find, bonds me to other people in ways that the rest of those identities, who cares on a certain level. So, I wanted to write a story about, she wanted me to write the story about, her coming home from upstate New York, right? Well, from prison in upstate New York. Because, it's a book that's a lot about New York generally. I kind of wish I could have made it a little more about upstate, but one of the conceits of the book is that, I didn't want to focus on what was going on in prison itself. I wanted to talk about recidivism, because in my research, I was discovering that was one of those things that people never really addressed. Everybody's always seemed to have this lurid fascination with ooh, what's going on behind bars? Ooh, how bad is it? Oh, what, how awfully are they treating people? Whereas I felt like people are also being treated awfully when they get back, because there's not enough, nobody cares enough. No, there's not enough infrastructure. People feel that, people coming back from prison deserved what they got, even though they don't even really know what people got. So anyway, but I realized this is a long story, because there are a lot of different elements that just kind of tangled up with one another. And I was trying to make things hard for myself, because I told my cousin at a certain point, when I was writing the book. I was like, after Delicious Foods like came out and it did as well as it did, I was like, and I'd just gotten a full-time job, and I was just like, I don't know how not to struggle. So I just made it really difficult for myself as far as the book was concerned. I was like, let's pile this on too. So I realized that telling a story about somebody coming back from trauma in upstate New York was a retelling of the Odyssey, right? Because of the New York Central Military Tract, which is, after the Revolutionary War, they were giving away land that, of course, they didn't really, we know how we feel about the land now, but at the time, soldiers from the Revolutionary War were being given like tracts of land in upstate New York, and there was one guy in the office that was responsible for parceling out the land who was like a classical literature buff, and he named a lot of things in upstate New York after classical literature, like Ithaca and Homer and Troy, and there were some smaller towns like Homer and Ovid and Romulus, even.
Amazing.
There were just a ton of them. So I was like, okay, I guess I have to sort of work that in somehow, but also everyone's done that, and that's kind of tired. And at that point, I realized, well, actually, at that point, my husband, who is of Irish descent, his grandparents on one side, his great-grandparents on the other side. Is that right? Yeah. Are from there, and he spent some time there, and we went there, and I'd never been there. So I brought Ulysses, like you would, and was trying to go through it. And I knew that it was a text that also sort of used the Odyssey. It was like one of the, I don't know if it was the first, but it was one of the first to use a story, a contemporary story as a stand-in for the Odyssey. And I was like, okay, I'll throw that in there too. And so, I managed to make it really difficult for myself. But then all of these little things about both of those texts started to rhyme for me, and some of the structure made sense. Like, I basically took the whole idea of like someone wandering around the city on their, during the course of one day for the most of the center of the book is where, but Carlotta is kind of both Leopold Bloom and Molly Bloom and like a number of other sort of characters, and I don't know, that's, I guess, is that enough?
Yeah, it's fine. What do you think? Good for you?
But there's more.
Do you want to read something now? Does that make sense?
I guess I'll just read a little bit from the beginning.
Yeah.
So that and it'll probably be clear, but there's a conceit where Carlotta's voice continually interrupts the narration, and I think after a while you'll be able to understand that it's a different voice than the narration if my acting skills are up for it. 2 decades and change into her beef, Carlotta Mercedes braced herself for audition number 5 with the New York State Board of Parole. She knew her many years in the shoe, 23/7 with no TV, no radio, no books, and no good touch, would probably blow her case this time, too. With so many box hits, she couldn't finish any of the A&D programs the knuckleheads like to see. But solitary overkill wasn't the worst of her shots. Them son of a bitches said I had bad behavior, but they definition of bad behavior is if you scream when a CO whooping your ass like a Betty Crocker fudge cake. Why did she keep getting hit? Sometimes she thought her case grossed out the panel. Other times she blamed her mini-beefs, the LOMs, the LOCs, the LORs, the LOVs. She knew the bosses were pretty much Klansmen, and at some point she always went apeshit. Those motherfuckers better let me out this time, she told Frenzy, the new man she was riding with out in the yard the day she heard. Who is they to judge my ass? Shut up, bitch, he soothed. You think you special? Don't expect nothing. You got nothing coming. Her eyes rolled behind her lids, and she whacked her arms closed. I've been had known not to expect nothing forever by this time. 50 million motherfuckers already done told me how much nothing I got coming. So let's see it. Where my nothing at? And who's more of specials than I is? Her tongue had slipped a little out of fear that he didn't really have eyes for her, or big enough ones anyway. She felt like some kind of monkey mouth even before she'd shut her trap. If you want out, you better learn to talk right, Frenzy said, flashing a dimple. Folks be talking proper out there. Oh yeah, since when? She gave him face and flipped her hair so it grazed his nose. In 1993, Carlotta's cousin Kefele had shot some old lady who sold little bottles of Thunderbird to the skells of Bed-Stuy and put her to sleep for a month. Carlotta was in attendance, showing off her talent for bad timing. The lady woke up again, but the bullet lowered her IQ to a chimpanzee's, and she could hardly brush her own teeth anymore. Caffey landed in Attica, doing all day and a night. Mama must have stopped saving his supper. Carlotta turned state's evidence and still got 12.5 to 22. The public defender called that getting off with a reduced sentence, but to Carlotta, that didn't sound like getting off in any way, shape, or form. The robbery or the aggravated assault with a deadly weapon could have gotten you 25 each, the judge whined. You're lucky to be doing them concurrently. That's luck, then fuck luck. Sleeping Beauty's daughter, Noreen Green, always dragged her bitter puss up to the hearings, and she made no exception for this sequel in the franchise. She dug harsh sentences. She thought that if you croaked before you killed your number, they wouldn't dump your carcass off-site. When she shouted, "I want their bones to turn to dust in the prison cell," she meant it literally. She had spat that oratory at the public defender, a pale, mousy girl with big glasses who looked like a PhD candidate in macrame. Made the poor thing spaz and knock her coffee all over her papers, which show you how good the bitch had her shit together, not at all. Even before Carlotta's time on the catwalk that day, they'd kept her in the shoe, and of course the COs tried to yank her out before her toilette. She hadn't finished drying her sink-washed locks and massaging mess hall margarine into her scalp when they banged on the door, barking like Dobermans, selling wolf tickets about an upcoming beatdown. I was like, ho-hum, another? Because I knew they wasn't going to do nothing to me right before no damn parole hearing. Or maybe they was gonna, but I didn't give a fuck. Part of her wanted to risk an ass whooping, but the minute she clocked the reality, getting scalped with a bare hand, a Doc Marten jammed in her rib cage, animal fear took over. Her body cashed a check at her memory bank, and she could feel the fists and boots of yesteryear colliding with tender body parts. One time, a CO belted her in the face, and she almost made a meal of her own tongue. I was talking like Daffy Duck for 2 fucking weeks. And of course, they punished her for getting punished. Against her will, her mind snapped back to the worst of the worst, a scumbag called Dave, and something inside her gave way like a noose going slack after doing the strange fruit swing. Carlotta pushed her paws through the bean slot and let the COs cuff her. But she hadn't finished her face. She only had the blue pool cue chalk smuggled in from the juvie wing on her left eyelid. This gonna look bad. It do look bad. If they got no kick from paroling what some of these jerk-offs called he-she things with painted faces, no way would they spring a freakazoid with just one blue eyelid. The minute she saw her chance, she leaned over and smudged her blinker with the one chalky finger she still had, trying to keep everything clear of her headlights, because that might juice her eyeball like a lemon. Or maybe I should do like a fountain if that gonna get them on my side. They didn't let her shower either. As she swung past the cells in the cinder block alley, she could smell her funk through her prison grays. She hoped nobody else got a whiff. Probably can't nobody smell nothing over the stench of this joint nohow. Let's just say her look did not kill, but the peanut gallery whooped it up regardless, all piercing whistles, hey mommies, and do fries go with that shakes. Up at Ithaca, a lady didn't always have to bust her sparkle. These lusty hustlers weren't faking the flattery either, no way Jose. Some could take a mocking tone, but if she shook the tree, Carlotta knew she'd get a real nut. Oh honey, at this point, they'd fuck a mop. She beamed at the guys and wiggled her fingers as she passed, letting the handcuffs and chains stand in for the rocks and bling she'd have preferred. She couldn't call these suckers suckers, but why not gloat now, knowing the spotlight of parole would never beam down on such luckless gangsters, the same spider monkeys who'd bitten her like Rottweilers mauling a chew toy, passed her around like a spliff until the last red ember in her soul almost winked out with a little puff of smoke. Fuck these guys, they'd never even get a hearing, let alone 5. My ass be the Susan Lucia parole. If any of this crew did get parole, or even release, when hippos fly, they'd probably leap back into their hustle toot sweet and boomerang into these same cells. Carlotta's hellos took on the saccharine taste of scorn. Goodbye, Beezus. Goodbye, poor little stink bug. Ciao, Bella Glitch, you cold-blooded motherfucker. But who could tell if they'd finally boot her out of the joint? Carlotta knew what time it was. She wasn't bumbling around in Pampers, but a bitch got a dream. After the whole get smart routine with the halls and gates and checkpoints came to an end, the COs pushed open a green door, green like Frankenstein, and there sat 3 poker faces from the New York State Board of Parole. See evil, hear evil, and speak evil. Fingers poised on padfolios stuffed with the details of every beef they'd give a shot that day. Look at them smug-ass faces. Think they some kind of gods sitting at a tribunal going to decide my fate, which I guess they kind of are. Uh-oh, fuck me.
Thank you for that. Yeah, you get a real feel. You begin to get a real feel for Carlotta's voice in you and out of you. I did want to sort of talk, you speak about the violence, or she speaks about the violence and the sexual assault and the rape culture within prison. And I just wanted to drop a little bit of real data in terms of trans people, of GNC people within prison. And they are 10 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than the general prison population. And in 2021, the Sylvia Rivera Law Project and Take Root Justice said 75% of respondents, the majority of whom were transgender women of color, reported at least one incident of sexual violence by corrections officers or other prisoners. So this is really common. And, she has a voice that is able to sort of accommodate the violence she experiences through humor. But I have worked, and I think we have all talked about, supporting people in prison. In my previous work, a lot of trans women, mostly trans women of color, who are in men's prisons, and the daily beating, sexual violence that they experience is really unfathomable. I don't think we can really, just prison itself, I think, is unfathomable to a lot of people. But when you're in a prison that completely does not identify with how you identify yourself, and you become the most targeted. So when you say who has it the hardest, when you're thinking about that character, 100% in this case, right? Yeah. And she talks also about when she comes out and how the same identities that trapped her in there and caused her to be even more harmed. It's the same thing out here, right? And the
except we're free.
Except we're free, right? Except we're supposedly. I wanted you to see if you could talk a little bit about your work, and because in both cases, you can talk about your book in a second, we're talking about the rejection of gender norms, right? Whether they're gender queer or lesbian identified, maybe a butch identity, right? In either case, in Carlotta's case, you're talking about because she rejects masculinity, she's targeted. In your case, with your particular story, you're talking about the embracement of masculinity and how that makes your Tammy, who you can explain about in a minute, the target of violence, right? So we're talking about these exchanges. You want to tell a little bit, the audience, about your book?
Sure.
Yeah.
And I am so happy and thankful to be here with such a tremendous author, and it's a great book.
Yeah,
I really recommend it. So I wrote Manifesting Justice because I had been a prosecutor, and then I became an innocence litigator, and I represented women and queer people who were wrongfully convicted, and their wrongful convictions were different, and I didn't see that talked about, and I wanted to share it. So in this book, I share the story of one of my clients, And it's fundamentally about these three women, Lee, Tammy, and Kim, who meet at a drug rehab facility in rural Mississippi. And while they're there, Lee and Tammy fall in love. They find each other and they fall in love. And they finish the program, they're leaving, and Kim asks, can I come with you? I just want to get out of here. And they're good friends, and they say, yes, we'll take you with us. Well, within 24 hours, Kim has overdosed. So Lee and Tammy call 911, they get her to the hospital, and at the hospital, an ER doctor thinks, maybe Kim has been sexually assaulted. So what does he do? Ends up they bring in a dentist to look at Kim and her body naked. So Kim is unconscious in a coma, has overdosed, and they bring in a dentist to look at her body to determine whether there are any signs of sexual assault. And that cascades into ultimately charges against Lee and Tammy based on bogus evidence and homophobia, that the two of them are lesbians, that who could do something this crazy. It's not that it's made up and crazy, it's that, deviant people, lesbians, would do this. And in the book, I talk about how there's more hostility trained on Tammy, who presents as more butch. And I do have a short segment I thought I'd read on that, because part of the book really discusses the pressure to pass as straight within the criminal legal system and to save your skin, to help yourself. So Tammy, with her rocking mullet and cargo pants, fits some stereotypes about lesbians. Investigator Nolan, along with Kim's boyfriend, both called Tammy a bull dyke. Lee received more of the men's sympathy because of her appearance. She was a younger, more harmless, more typically femme co-conspirator. Maybe they even thought she was naive, only in a lesbian relationship because of Tammy's coercion or manipulation. And Kim passed, or was forced to pass, as straight, so that all the homophobic hostility was trained on the defendants. Passing as straight may provide safety for the individual, but passing also jeopardizes the community by diminishing queer visibility. And in the book, I also talk about my own experience as a queer woman, as a queer litigator, and the pressure for me to pass when I'm representing my clients, right? So that any hostility that would be against me wouldn't be transferred to my clients. So the police were more reluctant to prosecute Lee than Tammy, even though under their own evidence, Lee's teeth allegedly matched the bite marks. So I imagine an alternate universe where the dentist decided to match Tammy's teeth mold to his imagined bite mark, Tammy instead of Lee. Maybe prosecutors would not have charged Lee. She was armed with her more femme appearance, her youth, her long blonde hair, and her Mama Sheila's involvement. Tammy could not escape her appearance, could not disappear into the crowd. The stereotypes of deviant, bull dyke, criminal pinned to Tammy, subjecting her to criticism, hostility, and hate, even though Tammy was such a kind, giving, and harmless person. And then maybe Lee would have been the one coerced into testifying against Tammy, coerced into passing, coerced into training the attention and blame onto her dear friend in order to save herself. These are the decisions our criminal legal system forces people to make.
You touched upon it a bit about your own relationship to sort of passing and your work, but I wanted to see if either of you or both of you really would talk about your own experience as queer people under the umbrella and how it informed your decision to write this. I mean, passing is a real thing I think about with Carlotta too, her effort to try as soon as she gets out, right, and the outfit she puts on, and she's sort of stuck with this outfit that really doesn't compliment her. but the desire to be seen as who she is, and if that's reflected in anyone else. So I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Well, I feel like you're asking two different questions, right? Like, what was the first one again?
Sort
Just
of
like
your own
my
experience, yeah.
of feeling like.
Of homophobia. I mean, I'm sure there's intersecting, racism, homophobia, how these things affected your desire to also express somebody like Carlotta.
Well, I mean, I think after Delicious Foods, I felt that I had a certain kind of cultural capital, and that I should spend it on people who deserve, it to be spent on them. And I was sort of, I mean, I don't know exactly what point in the process that that occurred to me, but I mean, I suppose that one could shy away from writing about those kinds of things. I mean, plenty of people have done it over the years, but I don't know, it felt like there was a moment happening in the air, and it was possible. Well, not even that it was possible, because I don't really care if it's possible. The more impossible something is, the more I'm interested in doing it. But it just felt like the right thing to do, or the right story for me to try to tell.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly with, Black Lives Matter, there was, especially in Brooklyn around here, right in front of the Brooklyn Museum, there was a huge protest for Black trans women specifically, so there's definitely like a movement to be, to recognize people's struggle, for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like I've always wanted to make space for people who are different in whatever way they happen to be different.
Yeah, so I know that I felt pressure, as I was sharing a bit, as a litigator in the courtroom to be very femme appearing, especially in the South, to wear pastels, to wear skirts, like really femme presenting. Again, because I didn't want any of that hostility to turn onto my clients. And I know from talking with both my clients, but exonerees, queer exonerees, that they've had to wrestle with how are they going to present in the courtroom. So will they present as their authentic self and then see that used against them by a prosecutor who may ask questions completely irrelevant, may ask questions about their sexual orientation, may ask questions for a trans defendant. What about cross-dressing, using that language, sex work? Like, again, bringing up things that are completely irrelevant to the charge, which could be theft, but the prosecutors just bring this up to stoke any anti-LGBTQ bias. So that's a very real risk. On the other hand, I definitely know exonerees who have said, it didn't matter. I tried to pass and it didn't matter. They still use my sexual orientation against me. So I definitely wanted to share all of that, but I also wrote this book because it keeps going on. This keeps happening. And I founded and directed the West Virginia Innocence Project. I lived in West Virginia for 7 years. And just this week, the town that I lived in, a progressive college town, the school superintendent decided for all the schools in that county that they can't have pride flags in the classrooms, K through 12. They can't have pride flags, right? It's too political. Children need to, seriously.
The rainbow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
the
yes.
rainbow. Right.
It's too political.
Right.
Children need to be able to decide for themselves, essentially whether to hate, right? Like, how they want to respond. And this ignores how many LGBTQ teens are at risk for suicide nationally. So I just bring that up because having lived in West Virginia and Mississippi, I just saw it, and it still happens this frickin' week.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because the exonerees that I work with, there is a lot of conversation about what happens inside, right? There is, the fascination of the public, but there's also conversations that people have who are freed and exonerated, talking about how they survived for 10, 20, 30 years without a healthy relationship without sex with somebody they wanted to have sex with, right? So what I've seen a lot is that within the women's prisons, it's more permissible to have sort of same-sex relationships while you're inside, and within the men's prison is absolutely not allowed. Or if you're a top, essentially, it's okay, and that if you are not, then you're sort of like put in a corner and then used in that manner, right? And abused, 100%.
Is there a pejorative sense to the term "gay for the stay"?
I don't know if they would use that phrase, but yes, I mean, I think that maybe not using that language, but yes, I think that there is maybe like, lesbian until graduation, the same kind of thing. So, but I wanted to sort of talk about the sexual assault and rape that are central to Carlotta's story, right? The way she's able to talk about it, sort of frankly, but also uses humor, and just how traumatic that is, because we obviously know this happens. I personally have, counseled many people who have experienced it. She's a survivor, right? Yeah. So what is it about her that gives her the capacity to get through it all and remain open to others experiencing the world despite everything she has suffered? And you see that when she's out and in the relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of just, a sense of humor, an ability to laugh at herself, an ability to kind of see beyond, the circumstances she's in, despite how dire they are, right? Like it's like close to being delusional, but I think that's something all of us kind of have to share on some level, right? Like we're all kind of deluding ourselves that things are going to go perfectly well in our lives, and no, we probably won't die. Nothing bad's gonna happen. Everybody's gonna be okay. Isn't that how life goes? Kind of not, actually. But like that's kind of how we have to try to make it through. Like just don't think too hard about that part of it. Just try to I don't want to say live in the moment because that's such a cliche, but like just appreciate where you are and try to get somewhere. And I think that's very much what she's trying to do. Like she's trying to follow all the rules and and do everything that she's been told to do, but the information is faulty for one thing. And there are a lot of people who are kind of not exactly conspiring, but the system is like tripping her up in these ways that it just does by being inefficient. And so she's struggling to keep up, and she may not make it, but that's kind of part of what keeps you going, is like the feeling that there's something else to get to, even if what she thinks, especially toward the end of the book, even if what her aspirations are like way outsized compared to what seems likely to happen. Yeah. And that to me is really like bittersweet and beautiful, is that feeling of like, despite all the horrible things that have happened to me, I'm going to keep going and things are going to be great.
I thought the relationship that you show, so Carlotta has a son that she really had no opportunity to have a relationship with. And I thought the meeting of her with her son was very interesting, and especially the way you describe the sort of presentation of him and his masculinity.
Oh,
I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Right, maybe I should read a little bit of that.
Go for it,
yeah.
She's come home, and not unlike Odysseus coming back to Ithaca, she discovers that everybody's partying it up at her house. Let's see if I can find this place. Oh, actually, this is it right there. So she's like, there's this kind of thing going, like there's a kind of party thing going on, and she walks out into the backyard because she knows that somebody out there is eBay. His name is eBay, IBE, which is, hopefully I'll get to that point, but it looks like we might. At the back door, Carlotta loitered at the threshold and gazed at a guy she thought was eBay. Across the broken concrete and neglected garden, he held court at a patio table by a tree in the far right corner. He and some other men sat under a tattered umbrella, leaning at a steep enough angle that it looked useless. He do favor Jasmine. He got her skin tone. Jasmine is his mother. And I think those her cheekbones, but aside from that, not much. Why the hell she ain't here? Okay, I don't got no time to be shy. Puffing herself up like Foghorn Leghorn, she crossed the yard and approached the guy, using all the tricks she knew to conceal her fear. Breathe, bitch, breathe. Okay, grab your hip or some piece of furniture like this here lawn chair. Here go nothing. Hey, brother, is you eBay? To her deep disappointment, he laughed out loud, raised his eyebrows, took the toothpick out of his mouth with one hand and slapped the other with the table, continuing to laugh as he spoke. Am I eBay? What the hell are you talking about, lady? Man, am I a website? Hell, I wish I was eBay. I had a lot more damn money. Nah, I ain't no eBay. Carlotta recognized the behavior. This kind of bullshit jeering and shit talking made up 95% of the jibba jabba anyone ever stepped to her with in Ithaca. And that's just the fucking COs. Maybe this motherfucker had did time too, but with that smug attitude, he ain't got the shit kicked out of him near way enough. She leaned her palms on the table and stared directly at him. Oh yeah, lady man's gonna cut your stupid ass if you don't come correct. This the happiest day of my life, and I'll be damned if I'm gonna let you fuck that up, okay? I just got out the state pen today after 21 motherfucking years, but don't you think for one Kentucky Fried second I'm afraid to go back. You hear? She raised her finger and scribbled all over the air in front of his face. The man next to the one she had dressed down leaned sideways and threw his arm over the back of the chair. At orientation, they had said not to bring up your prison record, but fuck it, even though I am actually scared out my fucking mind to go back. Except that I would get to be with Frenzy again. Probably. Her bravado seemed to have baffled him enough to shut off his stream of contempt, but she knew not to wait for him to react. Nigga, I'm looking for my son. He spelled his name I-B-E, eBay. That's an African name that means friend in the language of Nigeria. His other parent gave him that name when he born in 1992, long before any of these white motherfuckers thought up the stupid website called eBay, okay? He the original eBay, see? The OG eBay. A dude sitting next to the arrogant guy whom Carlotta had barely noticed spoke up. Hey, ma'am, I might be able to help you. He raised himself from the lawn chair behind his friends and squeezed himself between the guy's broad back and the fence that separated their yard from the next lot over. Just come with me a second. The kid had lighter skin than his friend, cherry wood as opposed to mahogany. 5 thick cornrows defined his skull, each one ending in a stiff braid that curled up from his neck in defiance of gravity, like a black male Pippi Longstocking. His big, shiny tank top and tube socks were supposed to make him look taller, but aside from his clothes and his habit of leaning forward and dangling his arms in front of him when he walked, he resembled a jockey more than a ball player. Carlotta smelled the desperation in his attitude. Now, this a short, pretty man trying to look tall and ugly so he could got power. And he's so damn far from what he trying to be. Is he like Spike Lee nephew? I hate that he trying to be a big man and he ain't gonna do it. That is some sad shit. I feel bad for the motherfucker. The guy's expression gave away his vulnerability, and she discovered when they faced each other near the rose bush by the broken trellis. Since the old days, nobody had taken care of much in the backyard. The only upgrade consisted of a gas grill the size, color, and shape of a hearse dominating the far corner, pumping out smoke heavy with the aroma of burning beef over the ginkgo tree and out into the neighborhood. Them little ginkgo fruits be smelling so nasty when they fall everywhere. I remember that, like a giant baby out the 4:30 movie done puked all over Brooklyn. Listen, the guy mumbled, his face turned like he thought he'd go blind looking at her. I'm eBay.
Well, I have many more questions, but we're supposed to go to you all at this moment. So I think we have a microphone in the back, if anyone has a question.
So if you have a question, you can just raise your hand, and then we'll come over to you with raise your hands high.
Let's have an awkward moment.
Together.
There we go.
Hi, this is a question for James. You started the talk that you wanted to get into the reentry aspects of post-prison life, and I was just curious what kind of research you did to flesh out the story and sort of what you discovered and what was the scene that you knew you wanted to capture for Carlotta.
Well, I mean, it sounds like you're talking specifically about research I did into that aspect of the story, because I was trying to describe the research I did to another, like to somebody else, and it turns out that like all the gay clubbing I did in the 90s was like research. Who knew? It turned out that like growing up and coming to this neighborhood was a big part of that research. But the research that was specifically geared toward like the carceral system was like I went to like every website I could find. I read like 10 different books at least. I made a bibliography. I mean, I could email you the bibliography or something if you really want to know. I volunteered for an organization called GOSO. I became a member of the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. Just anything I could do to sort of try to understand a little bit from the inside what that world is like, because it's very cut off. I mean, I thought at certain moments that I would actually have to commit a crime in order to figure out like what the system is like, because the system is very closed off to anybody who's like an outsider. And one of the things I did notice as I was doing all this research is just how much slang is involved in each of the different like worlds, and that was something that actually really like I got really excited about, because for me slang is one of those things, at least the way that slang works in this country, is that if you can talk the jargon of whatever community you want to belong to, you're in. You could be a total fraud, but if you can talk the talk, you're in. Like you can get something out of that, you know, that group somehow. You can like be part of the group. And I was seeing that like even, you know, it seems to me like individual prisons have their own slang. And like trying to figure out, you know, I got, after the manuscript was done, I asked a couple of people who had experience with prisons to read through it and like make sure that there was nothing in there that was like, that's a term from the 1940s. No one would ever say that. So it was like, but yeah, I mean, there's a ton of websites, a ton of pamphlets actually from nonprofit organizations. But I seem to have this like superpower to like look at a pamphlet with all of the statistics, like the kind you're reading, and like try to like squeeze a human story out of it. So that's what I did.
Why the name Carlotta?
Well, she says that she got it from the actress Carlotta, whose name who we know as Mercedes McCambridge. Her real first name that she didn't use is Carlotta Mercedes. And Carlotta, at a certain point, I could try to explain. You might have to read the book, but there's a potato that speaks to her. Like, okay, she does, it's not really that funny actually if you think about it, because she's in solitary a lot and she goes kind of berserk, and like people do in solitary, and she happens to have this like potato that has a face carved in it. That's also actually a reference to something that happens in the Odyssey, but that's aside from, nobody's gonna really know that, I don't think, except the like Joyce scholars in the room. But this potato tells her to live the way that she wants to live as a woman, and to take the name take the name Mercedes McCambridge, but she's like, oh no, I might, you know, she might like find me and try to sue me for that. So I'm gonna use the first part of it and not the second part. There's also a radio drama that she refers to. Mercedes McCambridge used to do a lot of radio dramas and stuff, and she is at a certain point, this gets mentioned in the book, she is also the voice of Pazuzu. Do you guys know who Pazuzu is? The demon from The Exorcist. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very specific, but the lesbian social worker knew the same. I thought that was very interesting.
Well, she's a movie buff.
It was like a very queer
Oh
moment.
my God! Yeah, I know. Doesn't that always happen? You're like, oh my God, you're
You know this exact
Pazuzu. She was
obscure-
Pazuzu.
Yeah. Anybody else? Please go ahead.
So you went from a prosecutor to somebody working on the Innocence project. Now, can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Thanks for asking. So when I was in college, I was a rape victim advocate in Chicago for all these cities around Chicago. And that experience, for me, made me want to be a prosecutor, because I thought that being a prosecutor, I could stop repeat offenders. I could stop like these cycles of violence. And I was a carceral feminist. I thought that incarceration would actually solve these problems of violence. So I became a prosecutor, and that was not the case. It was also not the job. I mean, survivors frequently wanted nothing to do with us as prosecutors. They didn't want to go forward with a case. In our office, we would regularly have victims or survivors arrested and detained so that they'd be forced to show up at trial. So it was very much, this idea that as a prosecutor, you're the one who's going to make the decision that's going to be justice and put someone away. And it just wasn't the case. I mean, on the one hand, a lot of our charges that were very serious were dropped down to misdemeanors because we thought we couldn't prove them. But there's right here in Brooklyn, there's Common Justice, which is a restorative justice alternative. And they put out some stats that, according to them, I think it's 75% of survivors of sexual violence never get any kind of resolution from the criminal legal system. Either they don't call, it doesn't become a case, the case doesn't lead to a conviction, like they don't receive any kind of resolution. And that's what I found to be true in my work as well. And I had the opportunity to meet an exoneree, and meeting that exoneree just changed everything for me. It really did, having that personal connection and having someone who had great empathy for others, and I didn't. I didn't. I was a prosecutor. I was like, you've done something wrong. And it just changed everything for me. Thanks. Oh.
Hi. So I have one question, but first for James and then for Susie. James, what do you think is next for Carlotta? And Susie, the same question based on your experience as a social worker and someone who's worked with many trans women of color who are formerly incarcerated. What do you think Carlotta's life would look like in real life?
Well, I mean, I don't want to give away too much of what happens. So it's hard for me to answer that question without giving things away. So I think what's next is that people are going to read the book.
Good answer.
Yeah.
And I will not go into what would happen to Carlotta, but I will say, it's interesting your question about the reentry, because you did a great job of sort of showing how she's so excited, so, overwhelmed, right? Because everything is different, and then just back into the world, but also a white Fort Greene. That was not how she left it, which here we are, right? And what that means, and then coming in and not presenting in a way that seems gender normative, let's say, is going to be another aspect of resistance for her. So, how often trans women or TGNC people in general are employed? They can be fired in like 31 states without any problem at all. It's legal.
Yeah.
and or even just assumed to be a sex worker and profiled for that. So the barriers are huge, and so let's hope that things go well. But for in real life, for trans women of color, specifically Black trans women, and it's incredibly difficult. And so there are lots of organizations that can help and support people and advocate for them, but it's not an easy road for sure.
We have time for one more question.
This is sort of a Ulysses nerd question. There's a lot of gender ambiguity in Ulysses, but there also is a third protagonist, Stephen Dedalus,
Right.
who maybe suffers the most. I don't know, but it seems to me that he's this sort of aspiring, frustrated poet, and that made me think about the role of art or art making as a way to transcend. In your book, which, like everybody else, I haven't read, unfortunately, but I will. I mean, I'm sorry, but I don't think but if there's some way, I mean, I'm curious whether art comes in some, as so often happens with that kind of a trajectory, the troubled protagonist finds a way to transcend through some kind of art making, or maybe self-fashioning or something, and I'm just curious about that strand.
The thing I usually return to, and this is sort of funny because it might seem counterintuitive to a lot of people, is dance. Mm-hmm. It's almost always, in at least 2 of the books that I've written, it's always like a way of sort of casting off repression and, transcending the space and time, and in this case, it happens again. I can say that much. I won't say more about it because that might give something away. But like that physical, like moving freely physically, is in some way like that's kind of what that represents to me, like a kind of freedom of movement and to do like whatever sort of ridiculous dance. In fact, like some sort of Merce Cunningham kind of free form improv, contact improv. I'm sorry my friend Clorinda is not here to hear that.
Yeah, that connects actually really well to when you think about the ballroom scene as well, and
right.
voguing, how that originated, and if you watch Pose, they talk all, so there's lots of things to think about in terms of that connection.
Mm-hmm. Let your body move to the music.
Yes. Thank God, Madonna.
Vogue.
Well, thank you both very much for spending time and reading your stories, and I encourage everyone, please, to stick around and get an autographed copy and read both books. So they're really excellent.
I guess we'll be personalizing.
Yes.
Yeah.
In the lobby.
Personalizing.
That was amazing. Thank you, all 3 of you. And please do stick around. They'll both be just right out here, so you can go out the back doors and grab books, or just if you just want to say hi, just line up here, and we'll go out those doors for the signing. And thank you all for coming, and we'll see you on the other side there.